Okay, we're going over ethical practices and fair housing, information you need to know to pass your real estate exam. Um, so there's federal and state civil rights laws, okay? The goal of the laws is to create an open, unbiased housing market in which all individuals have the opportunity to live where they choose within their financial ability. All real estate licensees must be aware of the federal, state, and local fair housing laws. Very, very important. Okay? Failure to comply with these laws is both a civil and criminal violation. The reason I have those highlighted here is because that could be a question on the test. What happens if you violate federal or state civil rights laws? It could be a civil and criminal violation, and grounds for disciplinary action against the licensee. That's a given. State and local laws may be more restricted than the federal laws. Okay, so you can have federal laws, and then you have state laws, and then local laws, and whichever one of the three are more restricted, that's the one you have to abide by. The most restricted one. Okay. So, the Civil Rights Act of 1866. I would kind of know 1866. I don't know. Write it down. Write it in big print. Prohibits any type of discrimination based on race. So all the way back in 1866, they came up with a law that says you cannot discriminate on race. All citizens have the same right as is enjoyed by white citizens to inherit property, purchase property, lease, sell, hold, and to convey real and personal property. Okay, so all the way back in 1866, they said, okay, everybody is created equal, all race, regardless what your race is, you enjoy the same privileges that white people do, because white people had more privileges before that. I don't know when slavery ended, but I would assume very soon before that. Does anybody Google when did slavery end? Can you Google it for me? I bet you it was in the 1850s or 1860. Google. Anybody find it? 1865. Okay, so slavery ended in 1865. In 1866, they came up with the Civil Rights Act to say, hey, everybody, regardless of your color, has the right to inherit. Because before that, slaves couldn't inherit property. Okay, purchase, lease, sell, hold, and convey. And then there was a landmark United States Supreme Court case in 1968. So we went a whole lot of time before there was any amendments made to this. Okay. Jones versus Mayer stated that there's no exceptions based on race or color. And so then in 1968, you had the Civil Rights Act of 68 that prohibited discrimination not only on race, they added color, religion, and national origin. So 1866, right after slavery was abolished in the United States, they said you had the Civil Rights Act of 1866. It says everybody has a right to own property, inherit property, regardless of your race. Then they came in 68 and added color, religion, and national origin, where you came from. Okay. Then in 1974, so these dates are pretty important dates. You should know these. So these are the dates you need to know, Vaughn. 74, sex was added. You can't discriminate for sex. You know, prior to 74, you can discriminate because of sex. And back in the day, men had certain rights women didn't have. It all seems like wild and crazy today, doesn't it? And in 1988, they added families with children and disabilities. So this thing has been progressing since 1866 to get to the point where we're at today. And then there were still a few additions put on. So in 88, families with children and disabilities was added. Okay. And in 95, they have the Housing for Older Persons Act. In 1995, repealed the requirements that 55 and older housing have significant facilities and services designated for seniors. So they repealed that requirement in 1995. So federal law defines an elderly person as being 62 or older. Okay, federal law. Pennsylvania, it's 40 or older is a protected class. Holy schmolies. Ellen, you don't like that, do you? I don't know if you're 40 or not yet, but in Pennsylvania, 40 or older is a protected class. So see, Jace, the state law is more restricted than the federal law. So which one do you got to go by in Pennsylvania? State. Okay. You can discriminate ages 18 to 39. You can. You can. An example is college students. Okay. Exempt housing may prohibit occupancy by children if 80% of the units are occupied by somebody over the age of 55. You can restrict children only if the dwellings are federally approved through HUD. So do you think that there's some communities or buildings where they have all seniors? If 80% are occupied by somebody over the age of 55, they can restrict it. They don't want no kids there. Why? We'll say it while Jacob's out of the room. Kids are a pain in the ass. Take it from me. I got one sitting right there. You know, they're riding their bikes, tooting their horns, playing the radio loud. In those senior communities, they say, we don't want that. Okay? Federal law is everybody over 62 or older in a community can exclude children. So in federal law, everybody has to be 62 or over to exclude children in the community.
Bless you.
Bless you. And here's a fair housing poster. We have this in our office, prominently displayed. It states it's illegal to discriminate against any person, bless you, because of race, color, religion, sex, handicap, for marital status, or national origin. You need to know those. You need to know them just so that you can practice and be a good real estate agent. The whole goal here with these laws is it doesn't matter what color you are, doesn't matter what race you are, doesn't matter what disabilities you have the right to live where you want. Okay? And Dave is going to be instructing the class on the 17th. I could ask Dave this question. He'll remember it. Dave called me up. We had a situation one time where we showed a house. We were representing the buyer, and another agent was the listing agent. He happened to be, I don't know if he was the builder or not. Dave would remember that. And after Dave showed the house, he grabbed Dave on his side and says, those people were at color. I don't want them to buy this house. Okay. So now Dave called me up. We were in a goddamn problem. We had a problem Because the problem was, what the hell do we do now? And after I got some legal counsel, we felt that we needed to call the buyer up and tell the buyer what the guy said. We felt we had to do that. So we called the buyer up and we told the buyer about the conversation. And then we called the agent's broker up and we told the broker what the agent said. Okay. So, it was kind of a hairy situation. We didn't know. Dave says, do we tell the buyer? Do we not tell the buyer? What happens if the buyer's not interested in the house? Maybe we're just starting a big can of worms. We made the decision that full disclosure was the best thing to do. And we called the buyer, and they appreciate, I don't know if he ever bought a house from us, but they appreciated the fact that we were honest. Now, if you go on a listing appointment, and this happens a lot, hate to say it, still a lot of discrimination out there in this world. And the seller says, I don't want any people that are brown buying the house. What you do is say, this appointment's wrapped up. I'm sorry, I can't discriminate. It's against the law to discriminate, and you leave. Just that simple. Just that simple. So when we're presenting offers, the last thing we want to do is let the seller know what the race, any of the protected classes. We don't want to let them know what the race is, the color, what religion they are, what sex they are, if they're handicapped, what their marital status is. So when I say marital status, what do I mean by that? If they're married, you can't discriminate because of somebody if they have children and are not married. You can't discriminate because of married people. You can't discriminate because they got a kid. You can't discriminate if they're from Russia. Right now, Russia and Ukraine are hot, right? Or from China. You can't discriminate. You can't discriminate. And blockbusting is also illegal. We talked about blockbusting. What was that? I'm sure we'll get into it in this chapter. That's where tell somebody, oh, you got to better hurry up and sell your house now because those people have been moving into the neighborhood. And they're bringing property values down. So the goal is.
That's what I was going to ask. I thought some religions have their own little community sometimes.
What's that?
I thought religions have their own, or they just all go to the same place sometimes. Like Amish people, like I feel like it's like they have their own little family and little.
They can, but you can't tell a Japanese person that they can't live in that community. So do people sometimes congregate according to national origin? Absolutely they do. Yeah, absolutely they do. But the problem is you can't tell somebody else where to live. You have to let them decide on their own where they want to live. So if you said to somebody, you don't want to live over there because they're all Amish people in that community, that's a discrimination. That's discrimination. When I first started selling real estate in Perryopolis, there was no blacks that lived in Perryopolis. I sold the first black family a house in Perryopolis. Now there was a little town called Whitsett where there were people of color that lived, but none of them lived in Perryopolis. And that was back I started real estate in 87. So even back then, there was a lot of discrimination. And, is it worse? Is it better now? I don't know. I just know if you're in real estate, you don't want to discriminate. You want to let people choose. Now, for marital status is one or more individual under the age of 18 living with a parent or guardian. You got a single mother with a 12-year-old. You can't discriminate and say, I don't want to rent to you or I don't want to sell to you. Also includes if they're just pregnant. That's considered a child. All properties to be available to families with children under the same terms as without children. So if you just treat everybody 100% equal, now you got to be careful too. You don't discriminate because of your actions. And we'll get into that. Cannot restrict the number of occupants with the intent of eliminating family with children. So if you have a rental property and it's a 2-bedroom and you got a mother with 3 children, you can't say, oh, you can't live there because it's only 2 bedrooms and you got 3 kids and yourself. There's not enough room. Can't do it. You can't do it. Disabilities could be physical or mental, squirrel.
Got something you want to say?
It didn't have anything to you, but I was going to say a story about Charlie, but I'm not going to. So even mental. So sometimes you could look at somebody and not know that they're disabled because it could be a mental disability. Okay. Basically, a physical or mental impairment would be where there's substantial limits on one or more major life activities. It doesn't protect current users of illegal drugs. So if you're a crackhead, that doesn't count. Okay. Landlords must allow reasonable modifications. So if I am disabled and I pull up and I meet you at the house and I'm going to look at this apartment and it's on the second floor and there ain't no elevator, don't say you don't want this house because there's no way for you to get the second floor with that wheelchair. That's discrimination. That's all it takes. That's all it takes. People have a right to choose to live where they want to live. It's not your call. You've got a real estate license, not God's license. Okay? So you have to let that person make that determination. And if somebody with a disability wants to buy a property or lease a property, I should say, more than buy, and you're the landlord, you have to let them make reasonable modifications that would help make their life a little easier. Putting grab bars in the bathroom, maybe widening the door, maybe putting a ramp in. You can put an elevator in. Okay? Landlords must allow for reasonable modifications. You can't require a deposit to restore to the present condition. So if they want to put a ramp in, you can require a deposit in case when they leave, they don't take the ramp down so that you can take the ramp down. Most federal exceptions under federal law do not apply in PA, and no exceptions apply to race and color. So there's no exceptions to race and color. Owner-occupied 1 to 4 family dwellings, PA law, only an exception in the rental of a owner-occupied 2-unit. So in PA law, if you have a duplex, 2 units, and you live in one half of it, that would be considered an exception to the law. Or an owner-occupied rooming house with a common entrance and a shared bath, or a single-sex dormitory does not apply to race and color, but it could apply to race, to sex. So if you have an all-women's dorm, you could say, okay, no men, but you can't say no purple people. Okay, so know those exceptions, please. Single-family housing sold or rented by owner is an exception. Housing operated under organizations and private clubs that limit occupancy to members could be an exception. Okay. Individuals do not own more than 3 such homes at one time. So if you own more than 3 homes, even if you're selling them yourself, you would fall under the guidelines. Okay. Real estate licensee cannot be involved in any type of discrimination. So if it's an owner-occupied duplex, he lives in half, and he says, I don't want anybody with a disability moving in the other half, or anybody with kids moving in the other half. He could do that if he does it himself, maybe. I'd be afraid to do it even if you did it yourself. But you can't be involved in that, Ray. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
And you cannot advertise in no discriminatory advertising. So landlords may not refuse the rent to a tenant with a disability who requires of an assistant animal, even if the property has a no pet policy. So if you're leasing a place out, Christine, and you say no pets, and I come to you and I have a disability and I have a service dog, that's getting real tricky now, because it used to be it was only guide dogs, like with people were blind. But then all of a sudden they came with these service dogs. I see these service dogs all over the friggin' place.
So
Now, me and my
easy.
grandson was in a little bamboo one time. They're not in business anymore. And a lady came in with a dog. And the person behind the counter says, no dogs allowed. She says, this is a service animal. And she was arguing with the lady. And I told little Tom, I said, man, that lady's violating Civil Rights Act. Okay, because it says service animals. And remember we said some disabilities can be mental, not physical. Well, maybe that service animal helps you get through the day. I don't know. That little Willie dog that Lex is part owner of, that thing helps me get through the day. He helps my wife get through the day. He helps my marriage get through the day. Okay? So you got to be careful. You really got to be careful. Emotional support animals. Animals, doesn't say dogs. And therapy dog.
So they could, wait, so is this saying they can or can't have this? Even if it doesn't impact it?
If you're renting, you can't stop it if it's a service animal. Service animal. Service animal could be any darn thing. It could be a squirrel. Right?
A lizard.
Right? A pig. Landlords may not require pet deposit or additional pet rent. These animals are not pets. They're service animals. They're there to support that person, to help that person.
So hold on. So I can have a deposit on people putting ramps up and you know, fixtures, but
Can't have a deposit for a service animal. Now, if it's not a service animal, you can have a rent deposit. So since Willie Dog is not registered as a service animal, and Lex wanted to rent someplace, they can say, is that a service animal? She says no. Okay, I require a pet deposit. If she says yes, I would say don't even question the darn thing. Talk to your broker. Because I don't know, man. I'd have to talk to an attorney to find out if you even have a right to say you got any legal documentation. I just take your word for it. It's a service animal. We'll be done with it. That's how I would handle it. Can require the tenant to follow rules regarding waste cleanup, noise levels, and behavioral problems. See, Willie Dog's a good dog. He's not a barker. But yours yappers. So if you got a yapper as a service animal and he's yapping all night long, all night long, all night long, it could be a problem. Touchy ground. I sure don't want to, that's why I don't do property management anymore. Know that the Fair Housing Act is administered by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD. Please know that. HUD, Housing and Urban Development. Highlight it, dog ear it, mark it. Pennsylvania. Let's talk about Pennsylvania fair housing laws. The Pennsylvania Human Relation Act, in some cases, is more restrictive than federal. Federal exemptions have limited application in Pennsylvania. So even if it's exempt on a federal level, it may not be exempt on a state level. So Pennsylvania fair housing laws. We talked about federal a minute ago, right? Who administrates the federal fair housing laws? HUD. Okay. Pennsylvania state laws that prohibit discriminative practice in housing and employment. See, federal laws were just about housing, weren't they, Jacob? Pennsylvania laws now are not only about housing, but they're about employment too. Protected class, race, color, religion, sex, age, Pennsylvania 40 or older, national origin, for marital status, handicap or disability, or use of guide animals. Guide animals, touchy subject these days. Because of blindness or death, use of deafness, use of support animals because of physical handicap, the handler or trainer or the support or the guide animal or the person associated with any of these individuals. You can't discriminate. Any questions on that? Housing accommodations and commercial properties. The major difference between federal and state law is state law applies to housing and commercial properties, where federal law only applies to housing. So it's good to know that, Jace, that difference. Exemptions. In Pennsylvania, exemptions under federal law apply only to federal assisted, privately owned, and government housing that is federally assisted. So in Pennsylvania, the only way a federal law could be exempt and override the state if it's a federally assisted, privately owned, and government housing that is federally assisted. Okay? You just need to know this stuff. This stuff will be on your PA state test. This fair housing. Pennsylvania Real Estate Licensing and Registration Act is a violation of the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act to illegally discriminate in housing, to give false information, to discriminate. What do you mean by that? Let's say Lexi is a protected class and I got a place for rent. Ellen calls me and she says, how much you asking? I say 400 a month. Lexi calls me and I could pick up that she's in a protected class and I say, well, Lexi rents 700 a month. Making distinctions in location or availability of housing for the purpose of discriminating. Ray, you're a protected class. I don't show you any properties over in this neighborhood. But I know that a lot of people like you live over in this neighborhood. So I'm pushing you over here. I'm not even telling you about properties here. Just that action can be construed as discrimination. Just that action. People have a right to live where they want to live. Period. Done. Done. No, you have to have zero tolerance for this type of bullshit. And that's what it is. Licensees are subject to disciplinary action by the State Human Relations Commission, as well as the Real Estate Commission, if there's violations. The Pennsylvania Real Estate Licensing and Recovery Act prohibits discriminatory advertising. And the Real Estate Commission may discipline licensees. You guys will be okay with this stuff if you just know the protected classes, number one. Know that HUD oversees federal. Know that state may be more restricted than federal, and whichever one's more restricted, that's the one you have to roll with. And you have to have that official notice prominently displayed. Failure is considered evidence of discrimination. And anybody seeking to list properties must be given a copy of the official notice. So in our listing agreements, we have the official notice printed so that we can give it to people. Hey, we're really rolling through the 4 units. You guys are wearing me out. Wearing me out.
Are we starting 18 already? No, we're not done with this.
No, we're not done yet. But we're getting through it. We're getting through it. We're going to get through this today, and we're not going to try to do more than 4 units today because I just don't want to throw anybody over the edge. But what we will do is we'll do some review. I don't know. I kind of like that video. Maybe I like the music.
Fills it.
But it explained all the different protected classes. Sorry, guys. What time is this? Anybody know?
10 after 2.
We've been here for an hour. Let's take a 5-minute break. Let's take a 5-minute break.
We got yoga class.
What's that?
Yoga class.
We got a yoga class starting in the back there, huh?
I'm gonna crash after eating 2 donuts this
Oh,
morning.
your sugar what?
Yeah.
It's the first one I've done since 2020.
I'm going with 1 year on track.
I used to do 3 a year. Wow.
Oh, here it is. The golf simulator thing is in my sleep. It's $30 an hour. Sounds expensive. You can do baseball and stuff too.
That's cool. Is it in that building like next to Blue Brew? Is that
And there's like an eye doctor
Yeah.
office in there, yeah,
okay?
in that building. Oh, yeah.
The ones that I didn't have to outline to.
Good luck. And hopefully this real estate class helps you with that.
Oh, it has. It's helped me a lot. Every time we would go back and forth with agents about the first property we looked at. But we can do this and this, right? And throw a few things out. I didn't tell her that I was in classes because I don't want to step on her feet
No,
or anything.
no.
Like make her feel like she wasn't doing something right or saying something right. She didn't do the this though.
Consumer notice.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't.
She showed me 2 houses. We've gone back and forth with email and photos.
She will probably when you write a contract. Maybe their office will require it. Good luck with that. Let me know how that goes with that septic. Okay, boys and girls. Oh, Well, we were still taping too, and we took a break. Sorry about that if you guys are watching this on YouTube. So let's talk about some other laws. So you have Megan's Law. It's on page 284 in the book. It's probably not real pronounced. Where sex offenders, when released from prison, register with local police. So that's what Megan's Law has to do with. People could actually make their offer contingent upon, doing some research to see if there's any pedophiles in the neighborhood. And an index of sex offenders registered in all 50 states can be found on the website www.prevent/abuse/now.com. So that's commonly talked about. Sometimes people want to know if there's any sex offenders in the neighborhood. There's the Equal Credit Opportunity Act. So no Megan's Law is with sex offenders. Equal Credit Opportunity Act prohibits discrimination based on race, color, religion, national origin, sex, marital status, or age in getting credit. And it also applies to public assistance. You can buy a house and get a loan if you're on public assistance. They can't discriminate. So you're talking to somebody on the phone, you're doing your own little pre-qual, and you say, well, what kind of income you have? I'm on public assistance. If you say, well, then you don't qualify for a loan, you're breaking the law, because they may. So I always say, let the experts handle it. Let somebody, if you got a buyer, let a mortgage originator or a lender talk to that person to get the pre-approval. Don't try to do it yourself, because you can get yourself in trouble. Americans with Disability Act, non-discriminate in employment procedures and accessibility to goods and services by people with disabilities. And the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act. It applies to 4 or more employees. So the biggest difference between state and federal is what? State laws cover commercial and the workplace. Federal law is just housing. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about fair housing enforcement. We talked about block busting, right? Also known as panic selling. Can't do it. Steering. We talked about steering with the situation with Ray, right? Ray was somebody that was a protected class, and I was steering him over, Lex, to this neighborhood because I knew other people like Ray lived here. And I wasn't telling him about homes in this neighborhood. That's steering. You're not allowed to do that. I'm sure you're going to see these two on a test for sure. Advertising. You can't, language that indicates a preference or limitation is discriminatory. Adults only. Can't do it. Jewish home. Can't do it. Private. Traditional. Language that representations included in non-standard electronic media like social media must comply with fair housing. Appraising. You cannot consider the protected class as a factor when preparing valuations of an appraisal. I heard somebody complain about that the other day with an appraisal, that they were at the house, the appraiser came in, appraised it for one number, they got another appraiser, they weren't in the house, they took all their family photos down, and it appraised for a much larger number. Redlining, refusing to make mortgage loans. You need to know what that is. That's refusing to make mortgage loans or issue insurance policies in a specific geographical area. So if I'm a mortgage company and I know that this is a more lower income level area, I can't refuse to do loans here and only do loans over here where they're a higher standard of living. Okay. That's called redlining. I would know that one. Complaints are investigated by HUD. Conciliation is the result of a complaint by obtaining assurances that you won't do it again. So sometimes there may be discrimination, but you really didn't intend to discriminate. So you may have to go in front of a hearing and say, hey, I didn't intend to discriminate. I promise you I won't never do that again. Administrative proceedings. The administrative law judge has the authority to issue an injunction, award damages, and impose civil penalties. So for the first offense, $16,000, guys. And this is not split with your broker. This is against you. Second offense, $42,500. Third offense and up, $70,000 per offense. And complaints under the Civil Rights Act of 1866 must be taken directly to federal court. So it's a federal offense. Pretty big dollars, huh, Squirrel?
Discrimination in housing contributes to the persistence of broader inequalities in housing, in homeownership, in neighborhoods, access to education, wealth building. So where we live really matters.
Sorry, Squirrel. I think about all these YouTube videos.
Click on it.
What's that?
Click on it.
I can't get rid of it. There it is. See what happens. Get rid of that other stuff. This is the most stressful part of the job. I'm getting it, but guys, I'm getting better, aren't I? You don't see me freaking out, do you? I mean, how many times can you have the same problem and not figure it out?
Discrimination in housing contributes to the persistence of broader inequalities in housing, in homeownership, in neighborhoods, access to education, wealth building. So where we live
This is a good video.
really matters. In order to know just how big a problem housing discrimination is, the Department of Housing and Urban Development uses a measurement method that's called paired testing. In each test, two people, one white and one minority, call and then visit an apartment complex or a real estate agent's office and inquire about a house or apartment that was just advertised recently. And they make the same requests, and they describe themselves as having the same income, the same assets, and the same employment. So from the perspective of the landlord or the real estate agent, they really are completely comparable customers. The only difference between them is their race or ethnicity. And if over hundreds of tests, we see that the whites are shown more units, told about more units, that's solid evidence of discrimination. And if our work can rigorously and responsibly measure how often that's happening, we can contribute to progress towards eliminating that unfairness. So our new study results find that both the white customer and the minority customer are treated politely. They get to come and have an appointment, and they find out about some units. But when you compare their treatment, you discover the whites saw more units or was told about more units. So what's troubling about this kind of discrimination is how hard it is to detect. I had a chance to meet with Justin Carter, who's worked both as a tester and a test coordinator on our housing discrimination studies. And he told me about his personal experiences conducting tests and managing the testing process. So Justin, I've done a huge amount of research testing in my life, but I've never really been a tester. So I have no idea what it's like to walk in the door and actually do the testing myself.
Well, being a tester it's somewhat different than the work that you do, being a researcher, but the mentality that I would always take working personally as a tester was, I'm trying to gather data. I'm trying to remain objective and pull as much data from this test as I can. And I've been involved on tests where an agent, said very objectionable things and said them again and again and again, and it just sort of just keeps happening. You're just sitting there. You just have to you don't want to encourage it, you don't want to discourage it, but you just sort of have to take it.
We walked a little bit in this neighborhood. Mm-hmm. It's a pretty nice homeowner, I think, mostly neighborhood. Did you test in neighborhoods like this, or was it?
Absolutely. We tested in all neighborhoods, all different income levels. Yeah. And this is exactly the type of neighborhood that we would do a lot of testing in. So neighborhoods like this, we tested these neighborhoods all the time.
In horrible weather?
Oh yeah, of course.
I've been working on these studies since the 1989 study when I was a research associate here at the Urban Institute. It's been really rewarding to keep coming back to this issue.
So do you guys get the gist? Do you get the gist of what you can do and what you can't do? And really, the Real Estate Commission has testers out there. Just like this guy's testing, they'll call you on the phone. So, and they'll test you. See if you're going to give them any information that would look like you're discriminating for whatever reason. So you got to be careful. And sometimes you can discriminate without even trying to discriminate. So it's important to do the same for everybody. Like, let's say, for example, you as an agent require a pre-approval for your buyers. Then you should require every buyer before you show them a house to get pre-approved. But let's say you don't. And you show Ray a house and you don't ask for a pre-approval. Not because you're trying to discriminate, just because you're sloppy business, unscrupulous, sloppy. Okay, so you don't ask Ray for a pre-approval, but Ellen, you say, we need a pre-approval. And then Lauren, you say you need a pre-approval. And then Bonnie, you say you don't need pre-approval. And then you go to a minority and say, well, hey, I need you pre-approved. That can be construed as discrimination because the way you did it, you're not consistent with everybody. Does that make sense? So just that simple way of an example can be construed as discrimination if you're dealing with a minority or somebody that's a protected class. So you got to be careful with that. You got to be careful. If you're going to ask for a pre-approval, have every client get pre-approved before you show them a house. If you're not going to ask for a pre-approval, don't ask any of them. Does that make sense? But you can see how somebody can get slighted because of that? Absolutely. Implications. The real estate industry is largely responsible for creating and maintaining an open housing market. We've talked about this a couple different times, where licensees are the community real estate experts, okay? And professional conduct involves more than merely complying with the law. You know, it's how you act, it's how you handle things. Intent and effect. This is in your book, okay? Without intent to discriminate, brokers and licensees and lenders and others may adopt policies and procedures that have unintentional discriminatory effects. Just like the example I just gave you. My intent was not to discriminate, but unfortunately the effect was. Disparate impact refers to the policies or procedures that appear to be neutral, but which negatively affects people in a protected class. The effects test. The liability considered the discriminatory impact on protected classes. So this, out of everything we went over this morning, I would say that this unit is one of the most important.
Whatever tomorrow demands.
I'm going to work on getting rid of those ads.
You'll be prepared.
Because this is going to be a big part of your state test. So didn't we say your state test was chapter 12? Chapter 12 and fair housing. Okay. And fair housing is unit 16.
If you've chosen the apartment industry for your career, chances are you know a lot about fair housing laws. But why are discrimination lawsuits so common? And what can you do to make sure you're never involved in one? You're probably very familiar with the 7 protected classes defined by the Fair Housing Act. You know, race, religion, nationality, color, sex, familial status, and disability status. Chances are good that your state or city has even more protected classes than the federal government. Did you know in Washington, D.C., it's illegal to treat people differently because of their political affiliation? It's true. If you don't know the additional protected classes in your area, find out. In fair housing terms, discrimination means treating someone differently because of their membership in a protected class. And it's against the law. Most multifamily professionals don't intentionally discriminate, but fair housing lawsuits happen, in many cases because people make mistakes. So let's run through Grace Hill's top 10 fair housing mistakes so you can make sure these missteps never happen at your community. Ready? Let's count them down. Number 10, forbidding kids from doing things, like saying children may not ride bikes on the sidewalk. Your rules can't be different for kids or people with kids. They're part of a protected class, familial status.
Right?
Instead,
We don't think about
say
that, do we?
no bicycle riding on the sidewalk. Number 9, asking a prospective resident, how many children do you have? This may seem like a polite conversation starter, but you don't want your customer to think you're treating them differently just because of their family size. Number 8, not realizing your state or city has protected classes in addition to the 7 in the Fair Housing Act. You've got to do your research on this one. The HUD website is a great place to start. Number 7, not keeping good records about your leasing tours. Document everything, including the apartments you showed and the rental rates you offered. Number 6, denying a rental application because you had a bad feeling about a customer. That's totally not okay. Stick to your community's qualification guidelines. Number 5, refusing to create a reserved parking spot for a resident with a disability because you have plenty of handicapped parking already. It's always wise to meet a resident's accommodation request if you can. Involve your supervisor before saying no. Number 4, telling a resident they can't have a service animal because you don't accept pets. Listen closely because this is important. A service animal is not a pet. You are required by law to allow them. whether it's a dog, a monkey, or even a miniature pony. Number 3, not realizing that hoarding isn't just the stuff of reality TV shows. It's a disability. Proceed with caution if you discover a resident is hoarding. Talk with your boss at once. Number 2, letting your maintenance team complete service requests in any order they like. To avoid any appearance of preferential treatment, establish a response system and stick to it. And the number 1 fair housing mistake is failing to train everyone who interacts with customers on fair housing requirements. And we mean everyone: leasing, management, maintenance. If they talk to the public, they need to be trained. Don't let these fair housing mistakes happen to you or your coworkers. Learn more online. And remember, it's hip to be fair.
So,
How are you gonna put a miniature pony in a house?
hey, don't matter. If it's a service animal, it is what it is.
And you can't charge an extra rental on that.
Don't even talk about it.
Okay.
Somebody comes to you and they got a service animal and it's a pony, discussion's over.
Just go with it.
Talk to your broker. Pass out the intent and effect. How about the guys in the back? Jacob, Jason,
Landowners' rights.
come on, Garen, you're not out of the woods here.
Yeah.
Save one for me in case you run out. Oh, I think I saved one for me. I'm also gonna have Jared pass out some study guides I have from units 1 through 6. This isn't the study guide that I emailed you. Now, if anybody wants any study guides, okay, I have like a ton of copies right here. And I'll lay them out. The next break, or when we go on class, or when we're done with class, come over and grab what you want. What you don't grab, I ain't throwing out. So there's plenty of them here.
I had one time, it was after my divorce.
Because I emailed all the study guides to you guys, right?
Even look at the place, like I showed up.
Yes, say yes.
Yeah, to rent.
The outlines,
He looked at me and he saw the kids.
the class
He
outlines.
said, "Where's your husband?"
Everybody
I
got
said,
an
"I'm
email
divorced."
on those.
He said, "You can't see the house." And I said,
So if you want a hard
"You
copy,
can't cut the grass."
take it on the
That's
next
so true.
break.
I said, "I've been cutting grass my whole life."
And then whatever
He's
you
like,
guys
"No,
don't
because
take,
it's
I'm
too much for a
tossing.
woman by herself." But yes, and he would not even let them look at the house.
Oh, that's so nice.
Do you have an example of discrimination?
Yeah,
Okay,
That was bad.
it was messed up.
okay, so let's wait till we get these turned in. I would like to hear it. Study guides 1 through 6.
When we were buying a car, I went to look at it first. And there was just one person scrubs. And the person, she said, "Hey, one day, she said, her kids were actually just real." She said, like, she said you see it first, and then later came and she was so shocked to see, oh, I know she thought I was saying, and she said, "I don't understand how
Okay.
you would have been able to afford that." The house was on
There was one, was there
$300,000.
one more?
But she
Oh, no.
assuming that she made
Was there,
the
did you
argument
pass all yours out, Karen? Okay.
that some
Okay,
person couldn't
so,
buy a house.
Ellen, you had a situation with discrimination. Do you want to share it with us?
It was probably about 15 years ago. And,
Okay.
I went through a divorce
Okay,
and I went to look at a house that was for rent and I had my kids with me. And I got there and the homeowner saw me and he saw the kids and he said, "Where's your husband?" And I said, "I'm not married, I'm divorced." And he said, "You can't look at the house." And I asked him why, and he said because there was too much grass to cut for a woman to have to cut the grass herself, so he wouldn't let me look at the house.
right. Terrible. I'm telling you, it's terrible. But you are all going to be better than that because you've been through this class, right? So you're going to be understanding. So if you, the definition, discrimination, intent and effect, I passed it out as a handout just so that you can review it and just so that it helps you.
You could have worked for a lawn mowing place. Like, how's he that? Like, what the hell is that?
There's a lot of people, Lex. There's a lot of people.
We should have 7 through.
And then,
We got the wrong handouts.
no, you didn't.
Yeah,
The 1 through 6.
we got through 6. We got 1 through 6 twice.
Okay, then throw it on the side, because I'm done with it. I had some extra.
We need 7
Sorry.
through whatever.
Okay, I don't have them.
Okay.
But there's some extra class outlines up there. So I must have made extra copies, and I had a bunch of them. I want to get rid of them. So I want you to look at this other handout too that I handed out. That says Chapter 17, but I didn't take the Chapter 17 off. So, and I love it when you guys pick up on little mistakes like this. Cross the 17 out, put Unit 16. Do you see, Lise, why I don't like naming them? It changed from the 13th edition to the 16th edition.
Well, that's
So
our
it's
chapter.
right for us.
Yours is right for you guys.
We're already on page 340 somehow.
We're killing it, man.
Lack of pages though.
Yeah, I kind of want to go to book just to clear this time.
Yeah,
Because
they're very,
It's the exact same.
don't worry about it.
30
Don't worry
pages.
about it.
I
You
know,
guys are in
it's
good
just-
shape. So this spells out, I really like this handout, all the different rules, starting in 1866. And then it talks about Megan's Law to the Equal Credit Opportunity, American with Disabled. And then if you look on the next page. So just some good handouts. If I'm handing you that stuff out, my thoughts are, you got this whole book, man. Jesus Christ, look at this book. You drowned in all these pages, right? You don't know what's important and what's not. You're doing a good job highlighting. But when I pass something out to you, it's important that you kind of pay attention to that. Okay, so implications for brokers and salespeople. We went through that. Okay, response to concerns of terrorism. You see it in your book? Asking the applicant for citizenship documentation during the screening process does not violate Fair Housing Act. Okay, so you need to know that. And is that in the book somewhere? Highlight it? No? Okay, then just remember it. So if you're asking the applicant for a citizen's documentation during the screening process, that does not violate Fair Housing Act. The Pennsylvania Intrinsic, I can't even pronounce that, Vandalism Act prohibits retaliation against those who file a complaint. So is that in the book? Or is these couple units not in there? Okay. So what that means is that if somebody files a complaint because of discrimination, that there's laws set up to protect that person if somebody would try to retaliate for that. And they have a special task force that investigates them. Ethical conduct. System of moral standards for integrity and competence. Okay, we have a system. And it's spelled out here in the law. It's a defined code of conduct for relationships within the industry. And fair housing guidelines, there's a joint effort between the Human Relations, PA Human Relations Commission and the Pennsylvania Association of Realtors, who is the largest trade organization in the country. And they have their own layer of code of ethics that you need to follow by. So everybody's trying to protect it. I passed out the Ethical Practices and Fair Housing Act. Does anybody have any questions about that unit? No? Take a 5-minute break. What time is it?
10 till?
10 till 3. You guys are wearing me out today, man. 4 units we burned through.
I know, my brain is like.
Don't worry about it. We're not gonna do any heavy lifting the rest of the afternoon. Lex, can you shut that down for me?
Probably.